She arrived seeking a home but found a nightmare. Rejected, alone with 2 babies in a merciless desert, her future seemed sealed by the cruelty of one man and the harshness of a land forgotten by God. But what no one expected was the untamed strength hidden in her mother's heart. This is a story of survival, of tears turned into struggle, and of a love that blossomed where there was only dust and despair. Get ready, because this journey will grip you from start to finish. Subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, and comment where you're watching from so you don't miss any of our exciting stories. The morning sun, a pale disk of fire in the faded opal-colored sky, cast a cruel light upon the redemption station. Or was that the name of that collection of rough boards and dust? A name that sounded more like a bitter joke than a promise. The locomotive, a monster of iron and smoke, let out its last hissing breath. A weary sound that seemed to echo the very exhaustion of the woman stepping down from the passenger car. Elara, her name, once a soft song in her own mind, now seemed to have been swept away by the ceaseless prairie wind, reduced to an inaudible whisper. Her dress, once a hopeful blue, a color she had chosen with such care for this new beginning, was wrinkled from the long journey, stained a reddish brown by the ubiquitous dust that seeped into everything, into skin, lungs, dreams. In her arms she carried not one but 2 identical bundles, small sleeping beings, Leo and Lena, oblivious to the scrutiny of the few curious eyes that swept over her from head to toe. They were hard, suspicious eyes, the eyes of people who had seen it all and were not easily impressed. She was the mail-order bride, come from leagues and leagues away, with a future promised in a yellowed letter, now clutched to her chest, a fragile talisman against the frightening vastness that opened before her. The figure waiting for her on the platform was tall but stooped, not from age, but from a rigidity that seemed to emanate from the arid, cracked ground itself. A wide-brimmed hat shaded a face where the lines of expression were more furrows of suspicion than of laughter. Caleb. The name was etched on the letter, and now, in her memory, associated with that unyielding posture. When his eyes, cold as shards of ice, fell upon the 2 babies in Elara's arms, a grimace of disbelief, followed by a cutting coldness like the desert night wind, took over his features. The promise, sealed with ink and postal stamp, shattered there, under the harsh sun that beat down like an iron hammer on the anvil of reality. This wasn't the agreement. His voice, a dry gravel, broke the tense silence that had settled on the platform. The sound seemed to scrape the air, painful like an open wound. A burden, not a wife. The rejection was public, brutal, echoing between the creaking of the station wood and the whisper of the wind through the skeletal cacti that dotted the desolate landscape. A burden. The word hit her like a punch to the gut, stealing her breath, the color from her face. The few onlookers who watched the scene flinched, some with a trace of disguised pity, others with cruel satisfaction. Elara felt the ground disappear beneath her feet, but she clung to her children tighter, as if they were the only anchor in that sea of hostility. Her name might not matter to these people, but Leo and Lena were all she had, all that mattered. Resilience, forged in previous losses she preferred not to recall. A stubbornness that kept her from collapsing, and a nearly extinguished faith in human kindness were the only weapons she possessed. Her internal conflict was a tight knot in her stomach, the paralyzing fear of failing her children, of not being able to offer them even the mirage of a home, fought against the last shred of hope that somewhere, someone, might see beyond her condition as a single mother with 2 hungry babies. The first act of her new life in redemption began there, with the bitter taste of rejection and the overwhelming weight of uncertainty. Caleb turned his back on her without another word, his tall, stooped silhouette disappearing into the dust of the settlement's main street, leaving her alone with her children and the echo of his cruel words. The station master, a man with drooping whiskers and tired eyes, approached her reluctantly. "Madam, you can't stay here, the station is closing." His voice wasn't hostile, just resigned. Elara looked around. The sun was beginning to set on the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple, a cold beauty indifferent to her despair. The night wind was already blowing, bringing with it the cutting cold of the desert. Where would she go? With 2 babies? Fear, before a knot in her stomach, now turned into icy panic. She needed to find shelter, food. She needed to protect Leo and Lena. The babies began to whimper, sensing their mother's tension, the approaching cold. Ilara rocked them gently, whispering words of comfort she didn't feel herself. She walked out of the station, her feet sinking into the soft dust of Redemption's main street. The houses were few and far between, most built of rough lumber and adobe. Some yellow lights began to gleam in the windows, signs of life, of homes, of everything that had been denied her. She tried knocking on a few doors. The first didn't even open. At the second, a woman with a stern face shooed her away with a brusque gesture. "We have nothing for beggars here." Beggar. The word wounded her again. She wasn't a beggar. She had come to be a wife, a homemaker. Night fell like a dark, heavy cloak. Ilara found a narrow alley between the general store and the saloon, a foul-smelling place that reeked of garbage and spilled liquor. It was the only refuge she could find. She sat on the cold, dirty ground, leaning against the rough wall of the general store. The babies nestled in her arms, covered with the threadbare shawl she wore. Their crying was low, weak, and it cut Ilara's heart more than any cruel word. She had no food, no water, only growing despair and the cold that penetrated her bones. Hope, once a living flame in her chest, was now just a stubborn ember, refusing to extinguish under the icy breath of hopelessness. She closed her eyes, praying a silent prayer, not for herself but for her children, that they would survive this night, that she would find a way to protect them. Suddenly a shadow fell upon her. Ilara opened her eyes, her heart pounding. A man was standing at the alley entrance, his silhouette outlined against the faint light coming from the saloon. She clutched the babies to her chest, ready to scream, to fight. The man took a step forward and she could see his face. It wasn't Caleb. It was a younger face, less hardened, with eyes that seemed kind, or perhaps the darkness was just deceiving her. "Madam," he said, his voice low and hesitant. "Are you all right? Do you need help?" Ilara couldn't answer. The words were stuck in her throat. Help? Could it be possible? After so much hostility, that simple question sounded like music. The man came a little closer. He carried a lantern, and the yellow light illuminated his face. He had dark hair and brown eyes that examined her with genuine concern. "I'm Thomas McGregor. I saw what happened at the station. It wasn't right." He looked at the babies in her arms, and his face softened. "They must be cold and hungry." Ilara finally found her voice, a hoarse whisper. "Yes, we are." Thomas nodded. "I have a small barn out behind my blacksmith shop. It's not much, but it's warm and dry. You and your children can spend the night there. And I can get some milk and bread for you." Ilara looked at him, suspicious. Why was he doing this? What did he want in return? But Lena's weak cry brought her back to reality. She had no choice. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "We accept." Thomas helped her up, carefully taking one of the bundles. Leo. He was surprisingly gentle with the baby. Together they walked through the dark streets of Redemption, Ilara feeling a small, fragile sprout of hope begin to rise in her heart. Maybe, just maybe, not everything was lost. Thomas's barn was small but clean. The smell of dry hay and leather hung in the air, a comforting scent after the stench of the alley. Thomas lit an oil lamp, and the golden light revealed an improvised cot with clean blankets in a corner. He brought a bowl of warm milk and a piece of fresh bread. Ilara fed the babies first, their little hearts calming with the food. Afterward, she ate a little, feeling strength slowly return to her exhausted body. Thomas watched from a distance, respectful, asking no intrusive questions. When she finished, he said, "Rest, madam. Tomorrow is another day." He withdrew, closing the barn door behind him, leaving her alone with her children and her thoughts. Ilara lay down on the cot, the babies nestled beside her, and for the first time since arriving in Redemption, she felt a small spark of peace. The night was still cold outside, the wind still howled, but there, in Thomas McGregor's barn, she felt safe, at least for now. The next morning brought the harsh reality with it. Thomas's kindness was a balm, but not a solution. Ilara knew she couldn't rely on his charity forever. She needed to find work, a place to live. She needed to prove to herself and that hostile town that she wasn't a burden. She left Leo and Lena sleeping under the warm blankets and stepped out of the barn. The morning sun was already warming the blacksmith shop yard. The metallic sound of a hammer hitting iron came from inside the workshop. Thomas was working, sweat glistening on his forehead, his arm muscles tense as he shaped the glowing metal on the anvil. There was an honest strength in his work, a dignity that Ilara admired. She waited for him to take a break. When he saw her, he smiled. "Good morning, did you sleep well?" "Yes, thank you. Thanks to you." She hesitated for a moment, then said, "Mr. McGregor, I need to find work. Anything. I can cook, sew, wash. I'm not afraid of hard labor." Thomas wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "Redemption isn't an easy place, madam. Ilara, right?" She nodded, surprised he knew her name. "Ilara. Yes. People here are suspicious, especially of outsiders." He thought for a moment. "Mrs. Peterson, who runs the boarding house, might need help in the kitchen or with cleaning. She's a fair woman, but stern. I can talk to her if you'd like." "I would be very grateful," said Ilara, feeling a new wave of hope. Mrs. Peterson was a tall, thin woman with a tight bun of gray hair and eyes that seemed to see through your soul. She listened to Thomas carefully, then examined Ilara from head to toe. "So you're the woman Caleb Rourke rejected," she said, her voice flat. Ilara felt her face flush, but she held her gaze steady. "Yes, madam, that's me. And you have 2 children?" "Yes, madam. Twins." Mrs. Peterson sighed. "This is no place for young children. But Thomas here seems to trust you. And I need help. The cook left me in the lurch last week." She looked at Ilara again. "You can start today, washing dishes, cleaning floors. If you prove yourself, maybe you can help in the kitchen. Payment is food and a small room out back. Will that do?" Ilara almost cried with relief. "It will do, madam. Thank you very much." The work at the boarding house was hard. Long hours, exhausting tasks. But Ilara didn't care. She had a roof over her head, food for her children, and a purpose. The small room out back was cramped, but she turned it into a cozy home for Leo and Lena. The residents of Redemption still looked at her with suspicion. They whispered when she passed. Caleb Rourke ignored her completely, as if she were invisible. But Ilara held her head high and kept moving forward. The suspicion in the settlement was like a sticky shadow, clinging to her heels with every uncertain step she took. But she was determined not to be discouraged. Thomas was a constant and comforting presence in her life. He stopped by the boarding house every day, sometimes for a meal, sometimes just to see how she was doing. He brought small gifts for the babies, a wooden rattle he had made himself, a piece of soft fabric he had found at the general store. One evening, after a particularly difficult day, Ilara was mending one of Thomas's work shirts. He watched her in silence, sitting at the small table in her room. "You have skillful hands, Ilara," he said finally. "Thank you. I learned to sew when I was little." She finished the mend, a perfect job, almost invisible. She handed the shirt to him. "Here it is." Thomas took the shirt, his fingers brushing hers for an instant. A small shiver went up Ilara's arm. He looked at the mend, then at her. "It's the best mend I've ever seen." He took a small package wrapped in brown paper from his pocket. "I brought this for you, for the babies." Ilara unwrapped the package. They were 2 small cloth dolls, carefully sewn, with embroidered faces. She smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her tired face. "They're beautiful, Thomas." "Thank you." "I know it's not much." "It's perfect," she interrupted him. "They'll love them." That small gesture, that exchange of kindnesses, strengthened the bond between them. It wasn't love yet, but it was friendship, respect, a mutual understanding that warmed Ilara's heart. Weeks turned into months. Ilara became a familiar figure in Redemption. Some residents began to greet her, to offer a shy smile. Mrs. Peterson, despite her initial severity, began to trust Ilara, giving her more responsibilities in the kitchen. Leo and Lena were growing, crawling around the small room, babbling their first words. They were Ilara's joy, the reason for her struggle. But life in Redemption remained difficult. Winter was approaching, bringing with it intense cold and scarcity of supplies. A sickness began to spread through the settlement, a fever that left people weak and debilitated. Ilara took every precaution to protect her children, but the fear was constant. One night, Lena started coughing, a dry, persistent cough. The next day, she had a high fever. Ilara panicked. The town doctor was an old and tired man with few resources. She cared for Lena day and night, applying cold compresses, trying to get her to drink some water. But the fever wouldn't break. Thomas came to visit her every day, bringing medicinal herbs he knew about, offering words of comfort. He saw the despair in Ilara's eyes, the exhaustion on her face. One of those nights, as Ilara watched over Lena's feverish sleep, Thomas sat beside her. The silence in the small room was broken only by the girl's difficult breathing and the crackling of the wood in the small fireplace. "You need to rest, Ilara," he said softly. "I'll stay with her." Ilara shook her head. "I can't. She's my responsibility." "We share that responsibility now," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "Let me help." Ilara looked at him, her eyes full of tears. She was so tired, so scared, and there he was, offering his unconditional support. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you doing all this for me?" Thomas took her hand, a hand calloused by work, but one that conveyed a comforting strength. "Because I see who you are, Ilara. I see your strength, your courage, your love for your children, and because I care about you." His words struck her deeply. No one had ever said anything like that to her. She squeezed his hand, feeling a wave of gratitude and something more, something she didn't dare name. "I care about you too, Thomas," she admitted, her voice choked. They stayed there, holding hands, sharing the weight of worry, the fragility of hope. That night, amidst the fear and uncertainty, something changed between them. A deeper trust, a more intimate connection. Lena thankfully began to improve in the following days. The fever broke, the cough lessened. Ilara felt immense relief, a deep gratitude for Thomas, who had been by her side through every difficult moment. But tranquility in Redemption was always fragile. Rumors began to circulate about a band of outlaws roaming the area, plundering small towns and farms. The sheriff, a man more concerned with his glass of whiskey than with the settlement's safety, downplayed the rumors. But the fear was palpable. People locked their doors earlier, looked over their shoulders. Ilara felt the tension in the air, a dark premonition. Caleb Rourke, who had ignored her until then, began to watch her from a distance, his gaze unreadable. She didn't know what to make of it. Was it a veiled threat, or something more? One night, as she was returning from the boarding house to her room, Ilara heard raised voices coming from the saloon. She recognized Caleb's voice, harsh and angry, and another voice, unknown, full of arrogance. Curious and apprehensive, she approached the dusty saloon window. What she saw chilled her. Caleb was arguing with a group of rough-looking men she had never seen before. They were clearly the outlaws everyone was talking about. And Caleb, he seemed to be negotiating with them. What was he doing, betraying the settlement? The idea was too horrible to contemplate. But the scene before her eyes left no doubt. Caleb was involved with those dangerous men. Ilara backed away from the window, her heart pounding uncontrollably. She needed to warn someone. She needed to warn Thomas. She ran to the blacksmith shop, fear propelling her feet. She found Thomas working late, as usual. "Thomas," she gasped, breathless. "You won't believe it." She told him about Caleb and the outlaws. Thomas listened intently, his face growing darker and darker. "I always suspected Caleb," he said, his voice grave. "He's a bitter man, capable of anything to get what he wants." "What are we going to do?" Ilara asked, her voice trembling. "They're dangerous. They could attack the settlement any moment." "We need to warn the sheriff," Thomas said, "and prepare a defense. We can't rely on him alone." But the sheriff, as expected, dismissed the warning. "Nonsense, McGregor. Caleb Rourke is one of this town's founders. He wouldn't hurt a fly." Thomas and Ilara knew they were on their own. They alerted a few trusted residents, those who weren't blinded by the influence of Caleb. A small group formed, determined to protect their homes and families. The tension in redemption was almost unbearable. Every shadow seemed like a threat, every nighttime noise a sign of danger. Ilara barely slept, worried about her children, about Thomas, about the uncertain future. Fear was a wild animal growling in her throat, but a mother's protective fury was an even fiercer lion. She wouldn't let anything happen to Leo and Lena. She would fight tooth and nail to protect them. The night of the attack came without warning, like a sudden desert storm. Screams tore through the silence, followed by the sound of gunshots and galloping horses. The outlaws were there, invading redemption with fury and violence. Ilara grabbed her children, her heart pounding in her chest. Thomas burst into her room, his face tense, a shotgun in his hand. "They're here," he shouted over the noise. "We need to get you to a safe place." He guided them through the back of the boarding house, avoiding the main streets where chaos reigned. The smell of gunpowder hung in the air, mixed with the smell of smoke from a building that had caught fire. The plan was to take the women and children to the church basement, a fortified place that could withstand an attack. But on the way, they were intercepted by a group of bandits. Gunshots echoed around them. Thomas pushed Ilara and the children behind an abandoned wagon, while he exchanged fire with the attackers. Ilara held Leo and Lena tight, praying for it to end soon. One of the bandits managed to sneak closer. He aimed his gun at Thomas, who was distracted by another shooter. Ilara saw the danger. Without a second thought, she picked up a heavy stone from the ground and threw it with all her might at the bandit's head. He fell to the ground, stunned, and Thomas had time to turn and disarm him. Thomas looked at Ilara, his eyes wide with surprise and admiration. "You saved my life," he said, his voice hoarse. "We saved each other," replied Ilara, her face pale but determined. They managed to reach the church, where other families were already sheltered. The sound of the battle outside was terrifying. Ilara tried to calm her children, singing lullabies in a low voice, while her own heart beat like a drum. Suddenly, the church door was broken down. The bandits stormed the place, led by a tall, cruel man, the same one Ilara had seen arguing with Caleb. Panic seized the place. Women screamed, children cried. The few men who were there to protect the group tried to resist, but were quickly overpowered. The bandit leader laughed, a cold, cruel sound. "Where's your gold, you worms? I heard this little town has some savings stashed away." N1 answered. The bandit walked among the hostages, his gaze predatory. His eyes stopped on Ilara and her children. Well, what have we here? A mother with her young, maybe they know where the gold is." He grabbed Ilara's arm, pulling her forward. Leo and Lena began to cry loudly. "Let her go," a voice shouted. Everyone turned. It was Caleb Rourke. He was standing at the door, his face pale but resolute. In his hands, a shotgun. The bandits were surprised to see him. The leader smirked. "Rourke, I thought you were on our side." "I was never on the side of murderers and thieves," Caleb said, his voice firm. "I made a mistake negotiating with you, but I won't let you hurt this town, or these people." A shootout followed. Caleb, despite being outnumbered, fought bravely. Thomas, who had hidden in the shadows, joined the fight. Other residents, emboldened by their courage, grabbed makeshift weapons and joined the attack. The church turned into a battlefield. Ilara protected her children with her own body, while the fight raged around her. She saw Caleb get hit, fall to the ground. She saw Thomas fight like a lion, protecting the innocent. Slowly, the tide began to turn. The bandits, surprised by the unexpected resistance, began to retreat. Some were killed, others captured. The leader, seeing the battle was lost, tried to flee, but Thomas intercepted him. After a brief, brutal struggle, the bandit was subdued. The silence that followed was almost as deafening as the noise of the battle. The church was in ruins, but the residents of redemption had prevailed. Ilara ran to Caleb's side. He was wounded, but alive. "Why?" she asked, her voice choked. "Why did you help us?" Caleb looked at her, a trace of regret in his tired eyes. "I was a fool, Ilara, blinded by bitterness and pride. I misjudged you. You and your children. You're not a burden. You're a blessing." His words surprised her. She had never expected to hear that from Caleb Rourke. Perhaps there was a drop of humanity in him after all. Thomas approached, his face smudged with gunpowder and sweat, but his eyes shining with relief. He knelt beside Alara and took her hand. "It's over," he said. "We're safe." Alara looked at him, at her children, at the tired but victorious faces of the residents of Redemption. She felt a wave of emotion wash over her. They had faced danger together, and they had won. In that moment, amidst the chaos and destruction, Alara knew she had found her place. Redemption was no longer just a collection of rough boards and dust. It was her home, and those people, once strangers and hostile, were her family. The immediate danger had passed, but the night had left deep scars. As the dust settled and the first light of dawn painted the sky in soft shades of pink and gold, the community of Redemption began to assess the damage. There were losses, injuries, and a bittersweet feeling of victory mixed with grief. Caleb Rourke had been taken to be cared for, his future uncertain, but his courageous action in the church had planted a seed of redemption in his own name. Although the path to regaining the town's trust would be long and arduous, Alara, exhausted, but with a surprisingly light heart, cared for Leo and Lena, who had finally fallen asleep in her arms, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded. Thomas remained by her side, a silent, strong presence. When the sun fully rose, illuminating the destruction but also the resilience of the survivors, Thomas looked at Alara. "You were incredible in there," he said, his voice full of admiration. "You and your children are the bravest thing I've ever seen." Alara blushed slightly. "We did what needed to be done, all of us." "I know," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "But you gave me hope when I thought all was lost." He hesitated for a moment, then continued. "Alara, I know this isn't the time or the place, but I have to say it. I love you." The words hung in the air, charged with emotion. Alara felt tears well up in her eyes. "Oh, Thomas," she whispered, "I love you too." He smiled, a radiant smile that lit up his tired face. He leaned in and kissed her gently, a kiss that sealed all the unspoken promises, all the shared hopes. It was a kiss of new beginnings, of love found amidst the ashes. In the days and weeks that followed, Redemption began to rebuild. The community, united by adversity, worked side by side to repair the damage, to heal the wounds. Alara was no longer the rejected outsider. She was a hero, a courageous mother who had fought for her family and her town. People greeted her with respect and affection. Mrs. Peterson offered her a larger room in the boarding house, a gesture of gratitude and recognition. But Alara and Thomas had other plans. They wanted to build a future together, a home for Leo and Lena, a place where love and hope could flourish. Thomas bought a small piece of land on the outskirts of Redemption, a place with a creek and a few trees. Together, they began to build a small house, with their own hands. It was hard work, but rewarding. Every board nailed, every stone laid, was a step towards their dream. Leo and Lena grew happy and healthy, running through the field, playing under their parents' watchful eyes. They were living proof that love and resilience could overcome any obstacle. Caleb Rourke, after recovering from his injuries, left Redemption. He could no longer face the people he had betrayed, nor the woman he had rejected so cruelly. He left in search of his own redemption, somewhere else, far from the shadows of his past. Alara never saw him again, but sometimes she thought of him, not with bitterness, but with a kind of compassion. He had been a broken man, and she hoped he found peace. Life in Redemption continued to have its challenges. The desert was unforgiving. Life on the frontier was hard. But now Alara was no longer alone. She had Thomas by her side, her beloved children, and a community that had welcomed her as an equal. The future, once an arid desert in her mind, began to bloom with the timid colors of a new dawn. She had learned that true strength didn't come from the absence of fear, but from the courage to face it. She had learned that kindness could be found in the most unexpected places, and she had learned that love, when true and deep, could heal the most painful wounds and build a home where there was only desolation before. And so, The mail-order bride who had arrived in redemption with a heart full of hope and arms full of babies found much more than a husband and a home. She found herself, her strength, her voice. She found love in its purest, truest form. And she found, finally, the redemption she had sought, not in a town's name, but in the warmth of her family and the promise of a bright future, built with her own hands under the vast and unforgiving western sky. Her journey had been arduous, marked by tears and losses, but also by moments of unspeakable joy and triumph. And as she watched the sunset paint the horizon with vibrant colors, Ilara knew, with a certainty that warmed her soul, that her story was, above all, a story of hope. The hope that, even in the darkest circumstances, must never be abandoned. For it is hope that guides us through the darkness towards the light of a new day.